My father hoped I would study in medicine King Bally and master the elegant art of silk thread pulse diagnosis. But the steward escorting me had a terrible sense of direction and somehow led me straight to a pile of corpses at the northern border camp. I tagged along with a grumpy, one-eyed old veteran and never even touched a single strand of silk. All I handled were severed limbs. I learned how to amputate, dissect, and physically set bones. 3 years later, I returned to the capital for the imperial exam. My father was thrilled, assuming I'd return with the refined scent of herbs, walking with grace and elegance. Instead, hidden within my wide sleeves, was a rusty bone-cleaving knife. I walked with a swagger, and my forearms were covered in muscles built from years of applying pressure to stop bleeding. Stroking his beard, my father asked me to demonstrate my finger strength for acupuncture. I looked around, walked up to the bluestone mill in the courtyard, pinched its edge with 2 fingers, let out a shout, and forcefully snapped off a chunk of solid stone. I held up the stone and turned around. Father, with this finger strength, my bone setting will be absolutely steady. His smile froze on his face. He pointed at me, his fingers trembling like leaves in the autumn wind. His eyes rolled back. He coughed up a mouthful of blood and passed out cold on the spot. Even though my father fainted, I still had to attend the royal female doctor exam. This concerned the Lin family's honor. The exam was held in a side hall of the Imperial Hospital. I was surrounded by noble ladies from the capital. Every one of them looked as delicate as a willow. On the mahogany desks in front of them lay exquisite mortars and silver needle kits. Some were slowly brewing beauty tonics, while others elegantly transcribed medical texts. I sat in the corner, a massive black wooden chest at my feet. The chest reeked of strong liquor and a faint smell of embalming fluid. Bored out of my mind, I snapped a willow branch and rapidly practiced surgical knots with it. The old imperial physicians acting as examiners paced around, nodding in approval. Miss Chen's calming tonic is brewed to perfection. Miss Li's handwriting shows the grace of a master. When they stopped in front of me, an old physician frowned. Lin Shui, what is your skill? I thought for a moment. I can cut chests open and saw off legs. The hall fell into an eerie silence for a second. Then, unbridled laughter erupted. Several ladies covered their mouths with their handkerchiefs, laughing hysterically. The way they looked at me was like looking at a madwoman. The old physician's beard twitched with anger. Vulgar, an absolute disgrace to refinement. Just then, with a loud crash, the doors to the side hall were kicked open. Several Jinui guards rushed in carrying a bloody, mangled man. Physician, tell the head physician to get out here. The man leading them was the commander of the Jinui, the emperor's most trusted ninth prince, the cold-faced tyrant, Xiao Jing. Your Highness. What happened here? The old physician's legs turned to jelly. While apprehending a fugitive, my lieutenant was ambushed and fell from the 3rd floor. Save his life, or I'll tear down your imperial hospital today. The old physicians trembled as they approached to look. The injured man's right calf was bent at a horrifying angle. Jagged, pale bone fragments had pierced straight through the flesh. Blood spilled all over the floor. The noble ladies in the hall had never seen such a gruesome sight. They screamed in terror and huddled into the corners. Sweating profusely, the old physician checked his pulse. This has damaged a major artery, and the bones are shattered. Quick, go to the storehouse. Fetch century-old ginseng to brew a life-saving tonic. Then bring the best wound medicine to apply. Ginseng tonic? By the time you slowly finish brewing that, he'll have bled out. Your Highness, this leg cannot be saved. We can only leave it to fate. Quack. Xiao Jing rested his hand on his sword hilt. A murderous aura ruthlessly filled the hall. Everyone held their breath, too terrified to make a sound. I sighed, stood up, picked up my black chest, and strode over to the stretcher. I shoved the useless old physician aside. Move. You're blocking my light. You insolent girl. What are you doing? A man's life is at stake. This is no time for games. I completely ignored him. I popped open the wooden chest with a clack, pulled out half a jug of high-proof liquor, forced the injured man's mouth open, and poured some down his throat. The rest of it, I poured directly onto the wound, and my gleaming bone cleaver. I turned to the stunned Jinui guards. Hold him down. They didn't move, instinctively looking to Xiao Jing. Xiao Jing narrowed his deep, dark eyes, and uttered 2 words. Do it. Several iron-like hands instantly pinned the man down. I raised the knife and brought it down. There were no flashy movements. The blade precisely bypassed the major arteries and scraped away the blackened, necrotic flesh. Swiftly and ruthlessly, the injured man convulsed in pain, letting out a tragic groan. Then, I put down the knife, gripped the broken bone jutting from his flesh with both hands. My gaze sharpening, I yanked my arms with sudden force, with a stomach-churning crack. The twisted, dislocated calf was forcefully snapped back into place by my bare hands. The hall was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The noble ladies who had mocked me earlier rolled their eyes back, and 3 of them immediately fainted. My expression remained unchanged as I pulled out catgut sutures and a curved needle, threading the needle. My fingers moved in a blur. The gaping, bloody hole was quickly stitched up. Finally, I tied off a beautiful and incredibly secure knot. I stood up and casually wiped the blood from my hands with a cloth. The bones are set, and the bleeding has stopped. 3 months of bed rest. Once the bones heal, he'll be perfectly fine to follow you and hack people again. House call and surgery fees. That will be 50 taels of silver in total. Will your highness pay in cash or put it on a tab? Xiao Jing's gaze locked onto me intensely, moving from my blood-stained fingertips all the way to my calm, even slightly bored eyes. In his eyes, there was none of his usual disgust and coldness. Instead, a spark of fervent interest ignited. What is your name? Lin Chui. Xiao Jing suddenly smiled. It was a smile the Jinui commander rarely showed, filled with undisguised ambition and a predatory drive. This pack of fools in the Imperial Hospital is not worthy of your blade. Pass on my orders. Lin Chui possesses decisive medical skills and exceptional courage. Effective immediately, she is exempt from the female doctor examination and specially recruited into the Jinui Zhenhu division as my exclusive forensic military doctor. She will report directly to me. The entire hall fell dead silent. The old physician's mouth dropped open, seemingly turned to stone. I raised an eyebrow. I had only wanted an easy post at the Imperial Hospital, but ended up being dragged by this living Yama into the Royal Elite Secret Police Agency. If my father found out about this, he'd probably wake up, only to faint all over again. Carrying my black wooden chest, I walked through the gates of the Zhenhu division. Before I left the house, my father sat on the threshold, crying like a 200-pound toddler. He probably felt my life was completely ruined. A perfectly fine noblewoman, running off to work for a bunch of spies. If word got out, the Lin family's ancestors would roll in their graves. But I didn't care. Compared to sitting in the Imperial Hospital, debating yin, yang, and the 5 elements with old men, I preferred the pure scent of blood here. In the courtyard of the Zhenhu division stood 2 rows of menacing Jinui guards. At the very front was the vice commander, Lei Hu. He looked at me like I was a little white rabbit stumbling into a wolf pack. His eyes were full of contempt and disdain. Miss Lin, His Highness making you a forensic military doctor means he values your talent. But the Zhenhu division doesn't feed useless people, nor do we keep delicate, quack doctors. What are you trying to say? Spit it out. Lei Hu sneered, pointing at the eerie gates of the Imperial prison behind him. There's a crucial Northern D spy in the prison. Half an hour ago, he caught the guards off guard and bit his tongue to commit suicide. Blood is everywhere. He has 1 foot in the grave. Dr. Shin from the Imperial Hospital took a look, said the main artery is severed, and not even a god could save him. Aren't you supposed to be amazing? Go save his life. As long as he's still breathing and can still talk, I, Lei Hu, will detour every time I see you. But if he dies, you and your black wooden chest can pack up and roll out of the Zhenhu division. The surrounding Jinui erupted in a roar of laughter. Biting one's tongue to commit suicide was an almost certain death sentence in ancient times. Aside from the endless bleeding, the sheer suffocation alone could kill a person instantly. They were digging a hole for me, hoping I would back down. I didn't say a word. I simply adjusted the grip on my medical chest, walked past Lei Hu, and headed straight into the cold, damp prison. Inside the cell, the Northern D spy lay on a pile of hay, convulsing all over. Thick black blood kept pouring from his mouth, and his pupils were about to dilate. The 2 Jinui guards on duty were stomping their feet in panic, completely helpless. I walked over, dropped to one knee, popped my medical chest open, light the lamp, and bring it here. Lei Hu and his men stood outside the cell, waiting to make a joke out of me. I pulled out a pair of catgut gloves and put them on. With my left hand, I gripped the spy's chin and forcefully twisted it. With a loud click, I dislocated his jaw entirely. Outside the door, Lei Hu's eyelids twitched violently. What are you doing? Are you trying to kill him early? I had no time for him. Dislocating the jaw prevents him from subconsciously biting down again, and it fully opened up my field of vision. I grabbed a slender steel hemostat and roughly but precisely thrust it into his mouth. Blood blurred my vision, but relying on muscle memory and sheer anatomical mastery, I gave my wrist a slight twist. The hemostat flawlessly clamped the base of the tongue, right on the ruptured artery. The bleeding stopped instantly. Next, I pulled out a curved needle and catgut. Under the dim candlelight, I began my best work. Suturing. The muscle tissue of the tongue is extremely fragile. But in my hands, the needle seemed to have eyes of its own, weaving back and forth, and tying knots. Without anesthesia. Without any painkillers. The excruciating pain shocked the spy's nerves. His eyes snapped open, and his body began to thrash wildly. The two guards beside him couldn't hold him down. I frowned, raised my right hand, and smacked him hard on the back of his head. Stop moving. If I stitch this crooked, also your mouth completely shut. You can eat through your nose for the rest of your life. The spy was slapped utterly senseless. Miraculously, he stopped struggling. He lay stiffly on the ground, letting me do as I pleased. After an incense stick's time, I snipped the last catgut thread, and casually popped his jaw back into place. I stood up, took off my gloves, and tossed them into the copper basin. Bleeding stopped. Life saved. I sewed up half his tongue. When he talks from now on, he might have a bit of a lisp, but it won't affect your torture and interrogation. I turned around, looking at the dumbfounded Lay who outside the cell. Vice Commander Lay, when you see me, remember to take a detour. Lay, whose mouth was wide open enough to fit a duck egg. He looked at the ground, at the spy who, though barely alive, was indeed still breathing. Then he looked at me. The expression on his face was priceless. The surrounding guards looked at me completely differently now. If on the first day, they thought I just had brute strength, now they looked at me like a living Yama who possessed dark magic. I didn't know when, but Xiao Jing was standing at the back of the crowd. He looked at me, the smile in his eyes deepening. What a woman, Lin Tui. He stepped forward, kicking Lei Hu out of his way. From today on, the East Courtyard is yours. Your rules are the Jinfu Division's rules. I had established my footing in the Jinfu Division. The moniker Yama Lin was even more effective than Xiao Jing's blade. When the guards got injured, they would rather tough it out than dare to come to me easily, because finding me meant experiencing the ultimate thrill of getting stitches without anesthesia. I thought I could finally and quietly focus on my surgical medicine, until one day, half a month later, the Jinfu Division's doors were shoved open. A young eunuch from the palace stumbled and crawled his way in. Ninth Prince, terrible news. Something awful has happened. The Empress Dowager has fallen gravely ill. She's rolling on the floor in agony. Head physician Shin from the Imperial Hospital claims it's because the calming tonic prescribed by Deputy Lin conflicted, causing evil energy to invade her body. His Majesty is furious. He ordered Deputy Lin thrown into the death row prison, and to execute all 9 generations of the Lin family. My hand, wiping my bone cleaver, stopped abruptly. Execute 9 generations? Doesn't that mean chopping my head off too? Xiao Jing's eyes instantly turned ice cold. He turned to look at me. I didn't panic. I methodically put the knife back in the black chest. I stood up. Your Highness, I'd like to request a leave of absence. Xiao Jing looked at the chest. In my hands that reeked of blood. He raised an eyebrow. To where? To the Imperial Palace. To save a life, and to teach those quacks what true resurrection looks like. Xiao Jing laughed. He drew his blade from his waist. Jinui on official business. Idlers, stand clear. I'll accompany you to the palace to cut someone open. Outside the Palace of Compassion and Tranquility, the rain was pouring down, but compared to the raging storm outside, the atmosphere inside was so heavy it was suffocating. Carrying my black chest, I followed behind Xiao Jing, stepping over the high threshold. The heavy scent of agarwood couldn't mask the faint smell of decay lingering in the air. In the center of the hall, my honest and timid father, Lin Pei, was being held down by 2 armed Imperial guards, pinned firmly to the floor. His face was ashen, as if he had already accepted his fate. On the throne, the young emperor was furious, gripping a celadon teacup so tightly, his knuckles turned white. On the couch, the Empress Dowager curled up in agony. Her hands tightly clutched her lower right abdomen. She didn't even have the strength to wail anymore. Only weak groans remained. My mortal enemy, Grand Tutor Shin's brother, head of the Imperial Hospital, Shin Yuan, was complaining with feigned heartache. Your Majesty, the Empress Dowager, had merely caught a mild cold. It is all because this quack, Lin Pei, prescribed the wrong, heavily cooling herbs, causing evil winds to enter her body, triggering an intestinal carbuncle. Now, her Grace's abdomen is as hard as stone, and her pulse is fading fast. Such a quack is committing outright murder. By law, his entire family should be executed. Lin Pei, what do you have to say for yourself? This subject merely prescribed a standard calming tonic. I absolutely did not use the wrong medicine, Your Majesty. How dare you argue? Guards, drag him out and execute him. Hold on. Xiao Jing's cold, sharp voice rang through the hall, carrying an unquestionable authority. Everyone's gaze instantly focused on us. Ninth brother, what are you doing here? Can't you see I'm dealing with a traitorous physician? I heard the Empress Dowager is gravely ill. I brought a divine doctor here. Xin Yuan turned his head and saw me standing behind Xiao Jing. He froze for a moment, then let out an incredibly mocking sneer. Ninth prince, you must be joking. This girl is Lin Pei's daughter, Lin Chui, a wet behind the ears little woman. An illness that even an old fool like Lin Pei can't cure. What could she possibly know? Bringing the daughter of a criminal here. Do you want her executed as well? I ignored Xin Yuan's clamoring and walked straight to my father. Chui, leave quickly. I've dragged you down with me. Father, rest for a bit. I'll handle the rest. With that, I picked up my chest and strode toward the Empress Dowager's couch. Insolent, who do you think you are? How dare you disturb her grace? Several old physicians spread their arms, trying to block me. My eyes went cold. With a flick of my wrist, my black chest slammed heavily onto the bricks before them, emitting a dull, massive thud. Get lost. The murderous aura cultivated from years among corpses made the old physician's legs go weak. They unconsciously parted to make way. I walked up to the couch. I didn't check her pulse, and I didn't ask her any questions. I simply pulled back her heavy quilt. You audacious witch! Xin Yuan shrieked. I turned a deaf ear, extending my right index and middle fingers. I accurately found McBurney's point on her lower right abdomen, and pressed down hard. The Empress Dowager groaned. Immediately after, I sharply released my fingers. The semi-conscious Empress Dowager suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream. Her entire body jerked up like she'd been electrocuted. Rebound tenderness was extremely obvious. Her abdominal muscles were tense as a board. A classic board-like abdomen. Diagnosis confirmed. Acute ruptured appendicitis, triggering severe peritonitis. In an ancient era without any antibiotics. This was indeed a fatal, incurable disease. I tucked the quilt back over her, turned around, and looked straight at the enraged emperor. The Empress Dowager's illness is indeed an intestinal carbuncle, but it wasn't caused by the wrong medicine. A toxic sore grew on her intestine. Now the sore has ruptured, and pus has filled all over her abdomen. Can you cure it? Yes. I'll use a knife to cut her belly open, cut out the rotting section of the intestine, wash the filth out of her abdomen, and stitch her back up. As soon as I said this, the entire palace felt like it was struck by a thunderbolt. Following a deathly silence, came a tsunami of condemnation. Crazy. This woman has gone mad. Our bodies are given to us by our parents. You dare to cut open the Empress Dowager's belly? This is dark magic. She's trying to assassinate her grace, your majesty. Your majesty, listen to her. Cutting open the belly, chopping out intestines. How can a person survive that? She's clearly using treatment as an excuse to murder the Empress Dowager. I implore your majesty to have this witch clubbed to death immediately. The surrounding imperial guards drew their swords with a clatter, surrounding me completely. This time, my father couldn't even cry. His eyes rolled back, and he fainted completely dead away, facing universal condemnation. I didn't take a single step back. My expression didn't even shift, because I knew a medical concept centuries ahead of its time was an absolute mind-blowing shock to them. Explanations were useless. I could only let the facts do the talking. I bent down and popped open the latch on the black chest. The emperor finally gave the order. Seize her. Just as the imperial guards were about to lunge forward, a crisp and resounding ring of a blade drowned out all the noise in the hall. Xiao Jing moved. He drew his long sword from his waist. The blade gleamed with a chilling coldness under the candlelight. He took a step forward and blocked me directly. The sharp point aimed at the surrounding imperial guards. Let's see who dares to touch her. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a bloody aura that made scalps tingle. Ninth brother, are you rebelling? Are you going to watch this witch kill our mother? Xiao Jing raised his head, looking straight into the emperor's eyes. Royal brother, aside from waiting for death, does this pack of fools in the imperial hospital have any other solution? Since she's going to die either way, why not let her try? He turned his head and looked at me. In his eyes was an almost insane level of trust. Then, facing the hall full of civil and military officials and physicians, he said something firmly that chilled everyone to the bone. Let her cut. If anything goes wrong, I will use my own head as a burial offering for mother. If anyone dares to step forward now to stop her from using her knife, I will cut off his head right now. The Jinui commander's murderous aura was fully unleashed. The imperial guards looked at each other, and not a single one dared to advance. Xin Yuan slumped on the ground, pointing at Xiao Jing, trembling so much he couldn't speak a word. The corners of my mouth curled into an imperceptible smile. This backer is really useful. I turned around, ignoring the storm of blood and gore behind me. My world was now solely focused on the patient in front of me. From the black wooden chest, I took out a set of extremely precise surgical tools. I had spent 3 years forcing the blacksmiths in the military camp to meticulously craft these, bring high-proof liquor, and more smokeless palace lamps to light this area. I skillfully issued commands. Several Jinui guards immediately stepped forward to help. I washed my hands with the strong liquor, exposed the Empress Dowager's lower right abdomen, and repeatedly swabbed the area with liquor. Although the surrounding physicians didn't dare approach, they all craned their necks, staring intently at my hands. They were waiting for me to make a fool of myself, waiting to see the Empress Dowager's blood splatter. I took a deep breath. My gaze instantly became incredibly focused and cold. The scalpel gently sliced through the skin. My movements were smooth and continuous, without a hint of hesitation. So fast it was dazzling. The moment the peritoneum was cut open, several physicians standing nearby started gagging from the stench. My expression remained unchanged. While operating scissors, I calmly called out the names of the instruments. The Jinui guards beside me, though trembling, forced down their fear and handed them to me. The necrotic flesh was excised directly. Then came the long and meticulous peritoneal lavage, until the warm water flowing out turned clear. Finally, suturing, threading the needle. My suturing speed was incredibly fast. It was like embroidering an exquisite piece of art. When the last catgut thread was snipped, I let out a long sigh of relief. I straightened up, and took off my gloves, all stitched up. I turned my head, and looked at the dumbfounded emperor, and the physicians who looked like they'd seen a ghost. The Empress Dowager's life is saved. In 2 hours, she will wake up. I pointed at the blackened appendix in the copper basin, and sneered at Shen Yuan, who was slumped on the ground. Dr. Shen, look closely. This is a toxic sore, not a wind cold. In my eyes, your medical skills aren't even worthy of carrying my shoes. The water clock in the side hall of the Palace of Compassion and Tranquility dripped steadily. After the surgery, the Emperor ordered me confined to the side hall until the Empress Dowager woke up. No one was allowed to leave. I sat on that yellow rosewood chair, and unhurriedly used a clean white cloth to wipe my bone cleaver and cranial saw. Xiao Jing stood right beside me. His arms were crossed, his eyes closed in rest, but that long sword remained firmly in his grasp. If anyone dared to come within 3 steps of me, that blade would undeniably be drawn without hesitation. On the other side of the hall, head physician Shen Yuan was whispering with several of his trusted physicians. On their faces, schadenfreude and impatience intertwined. Absurd! It's the biggest joke in the world. Shen Yuan lowered his voice, but I could still hear him. Since ancient times, anyone with their belly cut open is certain to die. That which actually dared to reach into the Empress Dowager's belly to cut flesh in less than 2 hours, her grace will surely pass away. When that happens, not only that old fool Lin Pei, but even this arrogant little brat will suffer a death of 1,000 cuts. I tuned them out, and continued wiping my knife. Xiao Jing suddenly opened his eyes, and looked down at me. Are you not afraid? Afraid of what? Afraid my catgut knots aren't secure enough? Rest assured, your highness, my stitches are finer than those of the best embroiderer in the capital. The corners of Xiao Jing's mouth curled up slightly, letting out a very soft chuckle. I'm asking you, are you afraid of death? If I die, who will sew up the tongues of your brothers? I placed the knife back into the black chest, my tone calm. Just then, rapid footsteps echoed from the inner hall. The Empress Dowager's personal maid came stumbling out, her face covered in tears. Seeing this, Shen Yuan's eyes lit up instantly. He immediately stood up. He didn't even bother to fake his grief anymore. He strode forward to meet her. Is her grace gone? Guards, arrest this witch who murdered the Empress Dowager. Death by 1,000 cuts. To appease the world, just as the guards were about to move, Xiao Jing's blade slid half an inch from its scabbard with a zing. The cold light was intimidating. The head maid, however, looked at Shen Yuan like he was crazy. She shoved him away violently. Your Majesty, wonderful news. Her Grace has awakened. Her Grace said she's thirsty. She wants a bowl of warm millet porridge. The entire Palace of Compassion and Tranquility fell dead silent in an instant. The Emperor suddenly stood up from his chair. What did you say? Mother woke up? Yes. Her Grace is awake. And her complexion is much better. She kept saying her stomach doesn't hurt as much. The Emperor rushed into the inner hall like a gust of wind. I picked up my medical chest and followed leisurely. Xiao Jing followed closely behind. As for Shen Yuan, he froze completely on the spot, like a rooster being choked by the neck. His mouth hung open, unable to make a sound. No, Impossible. Her belly was cut open. How could she possibly be alive? In the inner hall, the Empress Dowager was leaning against soft cushions, although her face was still pale, and her wound still ached faintly. The agonizing pain that had her rolling on the floor, that deathly pallor of a final struggle, were completely gone. She even had the strength to hold a small bowl of warm millet porridge and eat it slowly. The Emperor knelt by the bed, holding her hand, his eyes red. "Mother, how do you feel?" The Empress Dowager smiled weakly. "My stomach feels like a toxic tumor has been dug out. It's suddenly so much lighter. Just now. Who saved me?" The Emperor immediately turned his head and pointed at me. His eyes no longer held any murderous intent, replaced by undisguised shock and ecstasy. "Mother, it is Deputy Lin's daughter, Lin Chui. She used an extraordinary method. The Lin girl is truly brave. This old life of mine was snatched back from Yama by you." "Impossible. Absolutely impossible." He stumbled and crawled to the bed. "Your Majesty, Your Grace, this must be terminal lucidity. This witch must have used some dark magic to forcefully sustain her Grace's last breath. Her Grace's belly was cut open. Her vital energy is completely depleted. How could she possibly drink porridge? I implore your Majesty to execute this witch immediately." I looked at Xin Yuan, who was going crazy, and sighed. These ancient old pedants, they never give up until the bitter end. I walked to the bed and looked down at him. "Head Physician Shen, speaking of depleted vital energy, I'd like to ask you a question." I turned around, and from the incense burner nearby, hinged a bit of unburned incense ash, held it to my nose and sniffed. My eyes instantly turned bone-chillingly cold. "In the Palace of Compassion and Tranquility, the calming incense you personally formulated is constantly burning, right?" Xin Yuan froze for a moment, his eyes darting evasively. "Yes. So what if it is? This incense uses the most precious agarwood and calming flowers, specially formulated to help her Grace relax and sleep." I sneered, and viciously threw the pinch of ash into Xin Yuan's face. "If I'm not mistaken, this incense is laced with large amounts of cinnabar and lead powder. Smelling it for a short time indeed boosts one's spirit, creating the illusion of calmness, but inhaling it over years and months causes heavy metal poisoning, which weakens her Grace's spleen and stomach. Intestinal blockage. That is the true culprit behind the intestinal carbuncle. You keep claiming my father prescribed the wrong medicine, when in fact, you used this slow-acting poison to hollow out her Grace's body bit by bit. Xin Yuan, are you a quack doctor? Or an assassin?" As soon as these words were spoken, it was as if a glacial wind swept through the hall. The Emperor's face instantly turned as dark as thunder. The Empress Dowager's hand trembled violently. The porridge bowl dropped onto the quilt. Xin Yuan's face turned ashen. He shook like a leaf. "Slander! You are slandering me. Your Majesty, what does a little girl know about incense? Whether it's slander or not, find a few live dogs and feed this incense to them for a few days. See if they vomit and convulse. Once their bellies swell, you'll have your answer." Xiao Jing sneered coldly, without needing the Emperor's order. He kicked Xin Yuan right in the chest, sending the arrogant head physician flying and coughing up blood. He was kicked 10 feet away. "Guards, take Xin Yuan and all involved imperial physicians and throw them into the Jinfu Division's prison. I will interrogate them personally. Let's see who gave him the audacity to conspire against the Empress Dowager." Several Jinui guards rushed in and dragged Xin Yuan out like a dead dog. As he was taken away, Xin Yuan didn't even have the strength to beg for mercy, because he knew, once inside the Jinui prison, especially being interrogated by Xiao Jing himself, even death would be a luxury. The hall finally quieted down. A faint groan came from the corner. My poor father finally woke up from his faint. He opened his eyes in confusion. He looked at me standing there, safe and sound. Then he looked at the Empress Dowager, who was holding a bowl of porridge, looking kind. "What's going on? Am I in the underworld? Chui, why are you down here too?" I walked over and pulled him up from the ground. "Father, you're not dead. Not only are you not dead, but starting tomorrow, this Imperial Hospital will take orders from our Lin family." Xin Yuan's case was interrogated by Xiao Jing for only 3 days. 3 days later, a long list of implicated officials was presented to the Emperor's desk. Besides slowly poisoning the Empress Dowager with heavy metals, Xin Yuan also used his position as head physician to amass a massive fortune. He even secretly controlled the capital's medicine market. Punished for multiple crimes, the Xin family was raided and exiled. As for my father, Lin Pei, not only was he reinstated, he was bestowed the title of Grand Master by the Emperor, and took over as the head of the Imperial Hospital. The old man was smiling even in his sleep. His strides when walking were wider than before. But I didn't return to the Imperial Hospital. On the day the Empress Dowager fully recovered, the Emperor marked off a massive estate at the foot of the Imperial City. With a stroke of his golden pen, he named it the Surgical Emergency Department. This was the first time in the history of the Great Zhou Dynasty an official institution fully detached from traditional medicine was established to handle acute surgical conditions like sword wounds, fractures, and intestinal carbuncles. And I, Lin Chui, became the Great Zhou's first fifth-ranked female department head. In the second month after the emergency department was established, the Great Zhou celebrated the annual emperor's birthday. The capital was decorated with lanterns and banners. Envoys from all nations came to pay their respects. Among them was the Northern D delegation, who had been eyeing our borders covetously. At the state banquet for the emperor's birthday, the atmosphere was originally peaceful, until the Northern D envoy had his men carry a heavy black wooden coffin, swaggering right into the Hall of Supreme Harmony. The music in the hall stopped abruptly. Northern D envoy, what is the meaning of this? The civil and military officials were furious. Who gifts a coffin on the emperor's birthday? But the Northern D envoy laughed loudly, his attitude extremely arrogant. Calm your anger, Emperor of Zhou. Inside this coffin is Northern D's greatest warrior, Hu Yin Tai. Half a month ago, while hunting, General Hu Yin was pierced through the chest by a poisoned steel arrow. The arrowhead missed his heart by a hair's breadth. The envoy abruptly lifted the coffin lid. A giant man, built like an iron tower, lay inside. His face was as pale as gold paper. Half a rusty arrow shaft was stuck in his chest. He was barely breathing. The best shamans of Northern D said, if this arrow is pulled out, he will bleed to death. If not pulled out, the poison will kill him anyway. We heard the Great Zhou is vast and resourceful, and recently produced a divine doctor who can bring the dead back to life. Our great Khan has declared, if the Zhou physicians can extract this arrow and save General Hu Yin, the Northern D army will immediately retreat 300 miles, and we won't invade the border for 3 years. But if you cannot save him, it proves Great Zhou's medical skills are but an empty boast. Then this coffin will serve as a death knell for the Great Zhou. Within 3 days, Northern D's 300,000 iron cavalry will trample through the Jade Gate Pass. This was a naked death gamble, using the life of a dying man to blackmail the Great Zhou's border cities. The old physicians of the Imperial Hospital were called to the coffin. After taking just one look, their faces all turned ashen. They shook their heads repeatedly. The arrowhead is right against the major cardiac vessels. The surrounding flesh has rotted. Pulling it out means instant death. It is incurable. Is the majestic Great Zhou going to be forced to bow to this rogue tactic? Your Majesty, I request an edict to summon the head of the emergency department, Lin Chui, for an audience. An incense sticks time later. Carrying my black medical chest, I strode into the Hall of Supreme Harmony. I walked up to the coffin, ignoring the Northern D envoy's provocation. Left subclavian artery compression pneumothorax. The arrow's barbs are stuck on the posterior edge of the sternum. I rapidly made a diagnosis in my mind. This is extremely difficult in an era without blood transfusion equipment and modern anesthesia machines. This surgery was on hell mode. Director Lin, can he be cured? The Emperor's voice held a trace of tension. I straightened up and took off my gloves. Extract the arrow, clean the wound, and suture it. I have a 20% chance. Ha 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 ha. A 20% chance? In other words, General Hu Yin is doomed to die. Emperor of Zhou, I suggest you prepare to cede land and pay reparations. I meant, if I treat him in this broken coffin, it's only 20%. Your Highness, carry him to the side hall. Move all the smokeless palace lamps here over there, and bring 20 caddies of high-proof liquor. Also, I want you personally to act as my assistant. Xiao Jing didn't utter a word of nonsense. He simply waved his hand. Inside the side hall, it was brightly lit. The temperature was baked extremely high by charcoal fires. All irrelevant personnel were driven out. It was just me, Xiao Jing, and the Northern D envoy staring fiercely at the door. If the general dies in your hands, Northern D scimitars will. Shut up. If you dare make a sound and disturb me, also your mouth shut first. The envoy was stunned by the murderous aura in my eyes, and actually shut his mouth. I took a deep breath, and opened the black medical chest. My most precise set of scalpels, hemostats, and a rib spreader were lined up. Xiao Jing, hold his shoulders down. No matter what happens in a moment, you must not let him move an inch. Xiao Jing nodded. His hands clamped down on the giant's shoulders like iron pincers. I picked up the scalpel, and sliced open the rotting flesh on his chest, enlarging the wound. Black blood instantly surged out. I blindly grabbed 2 hemostats. Without the aid of X-rays, relying purely on muscle memory and feel. I probed into the bloody chest cavity, and precisely clamped the vessels above and below the arrowhead. Getting ready to pull the arrow, fine beads of sweat broke out on my forehead. Xiao Jing reached out one hand, and used a clean handkerchief, to extremely gently wipe the sweat from my forehead. Don't be afraid. I am here. My gaze focused. My right hand gripped the tail of the broken arrow. My left hand protected the surrounding blood vessels. My wrist suddenly exerted force. The barbed arrowhead was forcefully yanked out. Even though clamped by hemostats, the accumulated blood still sprayed out like a fountain, splattering directly onto me and Xiao Jing. Hu Yantai let out an inhuman roar. His body convulsed violently. Hold him down. The veins bulged on Xiao Jing's arms. He pressed the giant down firmly. My hands were quick and steady. The curved needle in my hand moved like a fluttering butterfly. Every movement was a race against the Grim Reaper. As time ticked by, when the final catgut thread was securely knotted, I snipped the thread. Due to extreme mental tension, I almost collapsed from exhaustion. Xiao Jing was quick to react. He grabbed me by the waist, pulling me into his broad embrace. I was panting heavily, looking at Hu Yantai, whose breathing was gradually steadying on the bed. I turned to look at the door. The Northern D envoy was utterly dumbfounded. I pulled off my blood-soaked gloves. The arrow is out. The poison is cleared. The man is not dead. Go back and tell your great Khan. The cities of the Great Zhou, you won't take a single inch of them. The borders of the Great Zhou, you'd best withdraw from them completely. Otherwise, the next time this blade cuts open, it won't be a chest to save a life, but your throats. He looked at me, covered in blood, standing tall and proud, as if he saw a true god, and Xiao Jing, standing behind me. The way he looked at me was no longer just appreciation and admiration. It was a kind of camaraderie for a brother in arms fighting side by side, and toward the Great Zhou's nation-protecting blade, an ultimate fanaticism and submission. By the time Hu Yantai woke up, it was already dawn the next day. This greatest warrior of Northern D touched his chest, wrapped in thick bandages, and looked at the poisoned arrow beside the bed, still bearing bits of flesh. His eyes were filled with lingering fear of death, as well as deep awe towards me. The Northern D envoy didn't dare say a single word. He led his men away from the capital in disgrace. Before leaving, they signed a state credential. The Northern D army would retreat 300 miles, and absolutely not invade for 10 years. The emperor was immensely pleased. In the Hall of Supreme Harmony, in front of all the civil and military officials, he laughed loudly. What a woman, Lin Chui! What a nation-protecting divine blade of the Great Zhou! Pass down my edict. The Surgical Emergency Department is officially established. Lin Chui is promoted to head director of the 3rd rank. Bestow upon her an imperial gold medallion. Not only will she manage acute cases of the capital's nobles, but she will also oversee the field medics of all Great Zhou's armies. I knelt before the throne, and accepted the heavy gold medallion with both hands. My father, Lin Pei, among the civil officials, had a beard that was almost pointing to the sky. He told everyone he met, "Did you see that? That's my daughter. The daughter who can dig out hearts and lungs barehanded." From that day on, the atmosphere in the capital completely changed. The threshold of the emergency department was worn down every day by nobles and officials. At first, everyone still feared me, feared my reputation for cutting people open. But when the son of the Minister of War, who had broken his leg, was put in a cast by me, and was able to walk with crutches after half a month, and when the Vice Minister of Rights had his throat pierced by a fishbone, and I used forceps to forcefully pull it out and save his life, the nobles realized praying to immortals and asking for medicine was useless. The knife in Director Lin's hand was the real life-saving talisman. I was busy off my feet every day, but in my exclusive VIP consultation room, there was one person who came even more frequently than the most critically ill patients, Director Lin. I didn't even look up. I continued looking down, sterilizing my scalpels in strong liquor. Ninth Prince, what have you broken today? Xiao Jing swaggered in, and naturally sat down in the chair opposite me. The dignified commander of the Jinhui, the terrifying living Yama, now rolled up his sleeve with extreme grievance. While practicing my swordsmanship, I accidentally scratched myself. It's bleeding. It hurts a lot. I rolled my eyes, leaned over to take a look. A scratch about half an inch long. Even the traces of blood had completely coagulated. The red mark was almost gone. Xiao Jing, if you had come even half an hour later, this wound would have healed itself. It wouldn't even leave a scar. Is that so? But I felt that. Only if Director Lin personally bandages it. Will it not be infected by evil energy? I sighed. Ever since the Northern D envoy incident, this cold-faced prince seemed to have contracted a terminal illness. where he would die if he didn't see Lin Chui. If he wasn't complaining of chest tightness, he was saying his chi deviated during martial arts practice. One time, he even smeared blood from a prisoner in the Jinui prison onto his own clothes, insisting he was gravely injured, and shamelessly loitered in my emergency department. For an entire afternoon, I took out a piece of clean gauze, perfunctorily wrapped it around his arm twice, and tied a dead knot. Done. Consultation fee, 10 taels. Go to the front desk to settle the bill. Xiao Jing didn't leave. He turned his hand, and his large palm grasped my wrist. It was getting late. The apprentices and handymen in the emergency department had all gone to rest. The courtyard was quiet. Only the cold moonlight spilled in through the lattice window, falling right on the two of us. The temperature of Xiao Jing's palm was very hot. With a slight pull, he drew me a bit closer. That unique scent of his, carrying a hint of a murderous aura, mixed with the fragrance of agarwood, instantly enveloped me. He put away his usual nonchalance, and dropped all his coldness and defenses. His eyes became extremely serious, even a little fiery. Chui, I am not sick. But right here, there really is a problem. There. His heart was beating strongly, beat by beat, through the thin fabric. I could even clearly feel the full and hard contour of his pectoral muscles. You cut open the Empress Dowager's belly, and pulled her back from the gates of hell. You cut open the chest of the Northern D General, and secured the centuries-old foundation of the Great Zhou. But Chui, when did you cut open my heart too? I froze. I, Lin Chui, have wielded a scalpel for 3 years, and seen countless fresh, beating hearts. But at this moment, my own heartbeat was completely out of control, matching his rhythm. His gaze was too deep as a pool, that could drown a person. Any other noble lady would probably be blushing right now, delicately falling into his embrace. But I am a military doctor who crawled out from piles of corpses. I took a deep breath. My fingers subconsciously pinched hard on his solid pectoral muscles. I even pressed down a couple of times, testing the elasticity. Xiao Jing's body stiffened abruptly. I looked up and looked at him extremely seriously. Your Highness, you've indeed trained your pectoral muscles well. The muscle texture is extremely tight. If one day you suffer a penetrating wound here, the feel of suturing it must be excellent. The air in that instant seemed to solidify completely. The corner of Xiao Jing's eye twitched violently twice. A chill ran from his spine, straight to his forehead. He looked at my face, filled with a thirst for knowledge and medical fanaticism. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Lin Chui, don't even think about it. My life must be kept to protect you for a lifetime. If you want to satisfy your urge to suture, the death row inmates in the Jinfu Division prison are all yours. I leaned against his warm chest, listening to his steady and powerful heartbeat. The corners of my mouth finally couldn't help but rise into a wide smile. All right, it's a deal. Ever since that night, under the moonlight at the emergency department, when we made the agreement to suture death row inmates, my relationship with Xiao Jing was finally brought into the open. When the emperor heard of this, he was happy to see it happen, and directly issued an edict bestowing marriage. On the eve of our wedding, it coincided with the capital's annual lantern festival. Xiao Jing took me out to see the lanterns. You stay in the emergency department smelling blood every day. You should experience some worldly liveliness. He held a rabbit lantern in one hand. With his other hand, he held mine tightly. Walking on the bustling Rosefinch Street, I took a bite of my candied hawthorn, and looked at his cold, stern face. The jarring contrast with the rabbit lantern made me want to laugh, but my smile, when we reached a secluded bluestone alley, vanished instantly. In the air, there was a scent that didn't belong to sugar art and cosmetics. It was a very faint smell of iron rust, or rather, the smell of metal rubbing. Before weapons are unsheathed, Xiao Jing's footsteps also stopped. The gentleness on his face faded instantly. He pulled me sharply behind him. At the same time, I don't know when, a short blade appeared in his hand. Since you're here, stop hiding like cowards. Xiao Jing stared coldly into the darkness deep in the alley. As his words fell, over a dozen dark figures leaped down from the high walls like ghosts, surrounding us completely. By the faint moonlight, I saw the dark patterns embroidered on their cuffs. They were Xin Yuan's remaining loyalists, perhaps mixed with Northern D spies lurking in the capital. Xiao Jing, Lin Chui, today is the day you two die. The lead assassin shouted angrily. Over a dozen poisoned steel swords slashed at us simultaneously. Xiao Jing snorted coldly, moving like lightning. He instantly met their attack. Amidst the flashing blades and shadows, blood and flesh flew. Xiao Jing's martial arts were superb. Every move was lethal, but he only had a short blade, and he had to split his focus to protect me. One assassin, at the cost of having his arm chopped off by Xiao Jing, managed to viciously slash a dagger across Xiao Jing's left arm. Black blood instantly gushed out. The dagger was poisoned. Xiao Jing's body swayed. He dropped to one knee, using his short blade to prop himself up. The remaining 7 or 8 assassins saw this, and pounced forward in ecstasy, wanting to hack us to death. Xiao Jing gritted his teeth, preparing for a desperate counterattack. Just then, I sighed. My left hand, which I had kept behind my back, moved to the front. Going out today, I didn't bring that conspicuous black medical chest, but I have a long-standing habit. Strapped to my outer thigh is always a row of the sharpest scalpels. I took a step forward and blocked directly in front of Xiao Jing. With a flip of my hands, between my fingers, I pinched 4 steel willow leaf scalpels, thin as cicada wings. Lin Chui, leave quickly. Xiao Jing was anxious, his eyes bloodshot. I didn't retreat. I looked at the charging assassins, my eyes colder than tonight's moonlight. You probably don't know. A top-tier surgeon knows far better than an assassin where the human body is most vulnerable. I moved. No internal energy, no lightness skill, only absolute familiarity with human anatomy, and an incredibly fast hand speed, honed from years of surgery. I dodged the blade by turning sideways. The willow leaf scalpel in my hand gently sliced across the side of the first assassin's neck, not slitting his throat, but precisely severing his carotid sinus. He didn't even have time to scream. His vision went black, instantly collapsing unconscious, turning and ducking. My second scalpel sliced across the inner wrist of another assassin, accurately severing his median nerve and ulnar artery. With a clatter, the steel sword dropped from his hand, clutching his wildly spurting wrist. He fell to the ground howling, slitting tendons, severing ligaments, cutting nerves. It was as if I was conducting an extremely elegant yet cruel anatomy lesson. My blades never struck deep into vital organs, but every cut stripped away their ability to move. In just a few breaths, the remaining assassins were all incapacitated, lying haphazardly across the ground. They looked at me in sheer terror. Devil, you are a devil. They looked at my spotless dress, and the willow leaf scalpel in my hand that hadn't even chipped. Terrified out of their wits, I leisurely put away my scalpels, and turned to walk toward Xiao Jing, who was on one knee. Xiao Jing looked at me. His deep eyes reflected my silhouette. He even forgot the agonizing pain in his arm. It was a look of absolute, utter shock. I crouched down and ripped open the fabric on his left arm. I took one look at the blackened wound. Aconite mixed with snake venom. Not too bad. You won't die. I unceremoniously lowered my head, sucked out the poisoned blood, and spat it on the ground. Then I pulled a bottle of emergency antidote powder from my sleeve, roughly sprinkled it over his wound, and bandaged it tightly. Xiao Jing hissed in a breath of cold air. He watched my practiced movements, and suddenly let out a low chuckle. What are you laughing at? Xiao Jing pulled me into his arms, resting his chin in the crook of my neck. His voice was a bit hoarse, yet laced with endless joy. I was just thinking, marrying such a ruthless princess consort, for the rest of my days, I might have to sleep with one eye open. I scoffed, and accurately poked a pressure point on his chest. Glad you know. If you ever dare to make me unhappy, I'll drug you in the middle of the night, dismantle your bones inch by inch, and piece you back together. It would be my honor. Outside the alley, the Jinhui reinforcements finally arrived bearing torches. Lei Hu rushed in with his men, seeing the miserable state of the assassins on the ground, and the two of us holding each other tightly. He was so startled he quickly turned around. Xiao Jing scooped me up in his arms, and strode out of the dark alley. The lanterns on the street were still dazzling. He looked at me, his eyes filled with melting tenderness. Let's go, Director Lin. We should return to the manor, and prepare for tomorrow's wedding. Since the founding of the Great Zhou dynasty, there had probably never been such a bizarre, yet impossibly grand wedding. The commander of the Jinhui, marrying the head director of the surgical emergency department. One was the terrifying, cold-faced prince who held the power of life and death in the imperial prison. The other was the female surgical demon who dared to cut open the Empress Dowager's belly, and snatched lives from the hands of Yama. On the day of the wedding, 10 miles of red dowry covered the main streets of the entire capital. The escorting procession wasn't made of ordinary porters and musicians, but neat rows of 3,000 heavily armed Jinhui guards. They wore their embroidered spring blades at their waists, and large red rosettes on their chests. They forcefully played a festive tune, until it sounded like a grim execution march for a house raid. The citizens of the capital had shut their doors and windows early on, only daring to peek out through the cracks. Everyone was secretly betting with this Yama couple getting together. Tonight's wedding chamber might just end in bloodshed. Wearing a red veil embroidered with golden phoenixes, I sat steadily in the 8-bearer bridal sedan. I didn't wear the usual bride's heavy phoenix coronet and robes. That stuff was too heavy. It gave me neck pain. The sedan stopped steadily in front of the prince's manor. Amidst the blaring firecrackers, a well-defined hand, bearing calluses from years of sword practice, reached in through the sedan curtain. I offered my hand. Xiao Jing's large hand instantly grasped mine tightly. The heat from his palm was almost scorching. Bowing to heaven and earth, bowing to the parents. My father, Lin Pei, sat in the seat of honor, crying like a leaking teapot, not just because he couldn't bear to part with me, but out of an extreme pride of surviving a calamity. Thinking back to the beginning, he thought sending me to learn silk thread pulse diagnosis would get me a cushy job at the Imperial Hospital. Who could have imagined? His daughter learned a set of hardcore medical skills for physical salvation. Not only did she become a high-ranking official of the 3rd rank, she also tamed the most formidable man in the capital. The old man wiped his tears, while proudly straightening his back. Even when Eunuch Chang from the Empress Dowager's side came to deliver gifts, he dared to confidently exchange a few pleasantries. The tedious formalities finally ended. I was escorted into the brightly lit wedding chamber. The surroundings finally quieted down. Only the dragon and phoenix red candles burned quietly, emitting occasional crackles. I sat on the marital bed strewn with longans and peanuts, and yawned out of boredom. Wearing a red veil was really a bit stuffy. I simply went by feel, pulled a small willow leaf scalpel from my waist, and nimbly twirled it between my fingers to pass the time. I don't know how much time passed. The door was pushed open gently. A faint aroma of wine, mixed with the crisp scent of agarwood, drifted in. Xiao Jing's footsteps were very steady, even though tonight, by those military colleagues, he had been forced to drink a lot. His breathing remained long and powerful. He walked up to me, and stopped. I could feel his gaze piercing through the red veil, burning hotly upon me. A jade rui wrapped in red silk gently lifted the red brocade blocking my sight. Xiao Jing's eyes shifted to my fingertips. At the willow leaf scalpel still dancing up and down, he couldn't help but chuckle. My princess consort, on our wedding night, while others hold round fans and bridal handkerchiefs, what you hold in your hand is a lethal scalpel. Is your highness afraid? It's too late to call off the wedding now. This blade of mine seals the throat at the sight of blood. If you ever dare to keep any concubines or mistresses outside, I guarantee, not only will I carve you into 108 pieces, I'll also sew you up flawlessly with catgut, so that the coroners at the Supreme Court won't even find the cause of death. He took a step forward, and leaned down without any defense, resting his hands on either side of me. I am not afraid. He tilted his head slightly, his warm breath brushing against my ear, carrying a slightly tipsy intoxication, and undisguised seduction. However, a moment of the spring night is worth 1,000 gold pieces. Princess, rather than playing with that cold blade here, why don't you cut something else? I followed his gaze, and saw a plate set on the table, filled with fruits symbolizing early birth of a noble son. A glint of mischief flashed in my eyes. I pushed him away, walked up to the table, and the scalpel in my hand moved like a fluttering butterfly. Only the flash of the blade was visible, with a few swift swish sounds. The fruit flesh was cut into 36 slices of absolute, uniform thickness. Even the fruit peel was carved into the shape of a blooming peony. I speared a slice of apple, turned, and brought it to the lips of a dumbfounded Xiao Jing. Have a taste, your highness. My knife skills, even for cutting a fruit platter, are the best in the Great Zhou. Xiao Jing looked at the apple platter that could be called a work of art, and then looked at me. He suddenly let out a low and joyous, muffled laugh. He didn't take the piece of apple with his hands, but directly from my hand, took the apple into his mouth. Then, he snatched the scalpel from my hand, and casually, with a thwack, pinned it onto a distant mahogany pillar. The knife skills are indeed excellent. The fire in his eyes was instantly ignited. He scooped me up in his arms. But now, it's time for me to test the princess's other skills. The red gauze curtain slowly fell, concealing the room full of spring romance. The red candles burned all night, illuminating this most terrifying, yet most enviable corner of the Great Zhou dynasty. Years later, the borders of the Great Zhou were as stable as Mount Tai. The northern D people would detour upon hearing Xiao Jing's name, and in the capital, the emergency department had tripled in size. I even opened the first medical academy, dedicated to teaching surgical medicine to both male and female apprentices. The common people gradually discovered the Yama couple wasn't actually as terrifying as the legend said, although the Jinui commander was still cold and ruthless. As long as Director Lin of the emergency department let out a cough, this living Yama would immediately drop his cases, and bring over a nourishing soup he brewed himself. In this world woven with political intrigue and flashing blades, I held my scalpel, and severed the chains of Yama. And he, gripping his embroidered spring blade, cleared all the obstacles in the world for me. We are each other's sharpest blade, and each other's sturdiest scabbard.